none for me. Thank you very much.
Richie.
What?
You're shouting.
I know. Beep, beep, Richie. Beep, beep.
So the Losers Club has gone to a hotel, and Mike starts in on updating them so they don't have to think about what just happened. He reminds everyone that the murders happened 30 years ago, and the town mainly turned a blind eye to it. Now that it's 30 years later, it's happening again. And here's where his interest in history comes in handy.
You count backwards in 30-year increments. Every date you come to will correspond to a huge disaster in Derry's history.
And now we're shown a flashback of Mike telling the class about one of the instances, and the teacher brushing it off as fast as possible, and now we get the significance of that.
Miss Douglas didn't want to know.
It's a disease, Beth.
The dairy disease, none of them wants to know.
Then Bev recounts a time when Bowers and his gang were harassing her. An adult saw it from across the street but didn't do anything.
That's when it really hit me. There was something terribly wrong in Derry, with Derry.
Back to recent events, Mike shows everyone the picture he found at the murder site in the beginning.
For whatever reason, there's something very special about us being together. Otherwise, it would have picked us off one by one.
Mike talks about how when they all originally met they were losers, but once they left Derry they all became successful. Meanwhile, Mike is just a regular old librarian because he stayed.
Our parents decided who stayed and who went. And when I grew up, I stayed here because I wanted to.
I think you stayed because you had to.
And the rest of them feel like they owe him for that.
How much farther is Derry?
Meanwhile, Bill's wife Audra has made a very bad choice and decided to follow Bill to Derry. And now she's almost there.
Don't you want your balloon first, Miss Denborough?
And it goes about as well for her as you would expect.
Don't you want it? Don't you want it?
Are you coming on to me?
Don't you want it? Don't you want it?
I'm not hearing a no.
Apparently he can cast the deadlights with his eyes. That's pretty cool. Back in the hotel, Ben is telling them all his inspiring weight loss story.
I mean, I ate salads like there was no tomorrow, and by March, I lost 70 pounds and I had grown 2 inches. Every time I ran, I felt like I could fly.
I was right, Ben is Rainbow Dash.
I just blew away the coach's best guys. After practice, I walked right up to the coach, and I asked for that apology. He was so furious, he hit me.
It's pretty amazing. Anyway, Mike brings up that they haven't really tried to come up with a game plan, and naturally Richie is still skeptical.
The sun comes up, I'm dust, and I would suggest that the rest of you follow me and get the hell out of Dodge.
But everyone just kind of ignores him as Bev remembers cleaning up the blood and how it came right back after she looked away for a second. But it turns out that all of her friends could see it too, and after they cleaned it up, it stayed gone.
I fell in love with all you guys that day.
Anyway, Ben goes to get something for Bev from her room. They think he shouldn't be separated from the group, so Eddie and Mike also go upstairs so they won't be too far away if something happens to Ben. But then Bev shows up and...
Your hair is winter fire, January embers.
My heart burns there, too.
It was you.
Ben, you should have remembered that she thought it was Bill.
I knew it was you. I've always known it was you.
And you should also realize that her timing is really weird. That actually reminds me of a scene from Kubrick's version of The Shining, but that was a lot more gross and this is a lot more silly. And here comes my favorite line.
Kiss me, fat boy!
Poor Ben just accidentally made out with Pennywise. Don't tell me this movie doesn't have any disturbing moments in it. Meanwhile, Mike has been getting knifed by Henry Bowers, who had been hiding in Mike's room. Ben and Eddie break in, and in the scuffle, Bowers ends up stabbing himself.
Mike! Mike! Mike!
Mike isn't looking too good, so they all pile into a car and drive him to the hospital.
If Mike dies, there will be 5 of us left.
At this point, they don't know if Mike is going to make it, and Bev isn't taking it too well.
Why is it doing this? Why is it so mean?
It's called having an emotional breakdown, Internet. Get over it.
I want to tell you something.
Of course, Beverly had dodged the question earlier about whether or not she was in a relationship, and now she confesses to Ben that she ended up with an abusive asshole who's exactly like her dad, which tends to happen.
How can I be so blind?
When you're brought up in that environment, you grow up to subconsciously think that abuse is normal.
If you see it now, you're not blind anymore, Beth.
Aw, Ben is such a good guy. He says something here that's kind of telling, too.
At least you fell in love with somebody. At least you felt something.
Yeah, it's pretty fucked up to think that it's better to be in an abusive relationship than none at all. But apparently that's just how lonely he was. It was kind of hinted at in the beginning with how unhappy Ben looked and how he clearly didn't care about this girl. I wonder if he was subconsciously pining for Bev all that time. That's really sad.
That's a miracle, too.
And because his words are kind of poetic sounding, Beverly has an epiphany about the poem.
Your hair is winter fire.
Which freaks Ben out due to what happened earlier.
When I was young, I thought it was Bill, but it was you, wasn't it?
Damn it, Bev, is that you in there? Is that the clown?
This is the only movie where that line makes sense.
It's me. My heart burns there, too.
Of course, Eddie is the one to interrupt the moment. Anyway, despite how grim things were looking, Mike is going to be okay, but he'll be out of commission for the rest of the movie. Only one is allowed to go in, so they send Bill.
My jacket. Outside pocket.
Anyway, he gives Bill the silver earrings they'd used to put it out of commission 30 years ago, because Mike went back into the sewer at some point and found them again. That's a little hard to believe, but oh well. Like it or not, this story tends to lean on fate a lot. Maybe a little too hard at times, but it is what it is.
I found one right away in the drain trap. The other one, the one that hit Pennywise, was lodged in a crack in the wall. I figured we might need that kind of help again one day.
It turns out that about 10 years ago, things were going really badly for Mike, so he went into the sewer, probably subconsciously hoping that it would wake up and kill him.
When I came out, I kind of got my life together. Only change was this.
So the rest of them go back to the hotel room, cover up Henry's body, and are planning on sneaking away, as shady as that may sound.
I think we ought to call the police.
You don't understand. This whole town is it in some way, all of them.
If we call the police, get the town involved, something bad's going to happen to one of us, maybe all of us.
Eddie and, of course, Richie are thinking about just going home, and Ben is on the fence about it.
I am a little old for monster hunting, Bill. So was Mike.
So was Stan.
On the way out, Richie hears a news report about another child's body being found.
They did reveal, however, that the body was severely mutilated.
Again, Richie's not heartless. He's just letting his fear get the better of him. And while it's not the ideal way that one of the heroes in a story would act, it's understandable.
I'm loads of fun. Gotta go, bye.
On the way out of the hotel, Bill hears piano music. The same tune we heard at the beginning of his first flashback that ended with Georgie's murder, because their mother taught piano lessons. But by the time Bill meets everyone outside, they've all decided to go back home.
I can't go. Because if I do, I'm going to live with this until I go insane. Till I can't tell the difference between my life and my bad dreams. I'm going back in. This time I'm going to kill it.
He doesn't explicitly ask for help this time, but the flashback is poignant.
Please help me.
And the rest of them respond the way they did back then. Except for Richie, who is like, "God damn it, Bill, we were almost out of here." So they drive as far as they can before having to go the rest of the way on foot.
I don't suppose anybody thought to bring anything really useful like a machine gun.
See, Pinkie Pie would just use her party cannon. Okay, no more pony references.
Mike went back down and got him. These are for him and for Stan.
Lucky 7.
We're all here now.
Oh, come on. Guys, what the hell are you gonna do now? Sing Kumbaya?
Beep beep, Richie.
You don't have to go down there, Richie.
Right. I didn't have to get on a plane in L.A. I didn't have to go to the dinner. I sure as hell didn't have to come out here, and now I don't have to go in.
I love how everyone else is rightfully like, "Oh, there he goes again," but then Eddie puts a reassuring hand on his shoulder. That's so sweet. There's those big hooks again. God damn it, Hellraiser. So they go down into the sewer and...
I remember the first thing I saw down here was one of those damn pom-poms.
No, instead they find Audra's purse.
She's down here. It's got her.
So of course Bill separates himself from the others like a dumbass. And now it's his turn to have a breakdown.
She followed me. My fault.
Bill!
I told
Bill!
Come on, Bill, pull it together. You talked them into this, now you gotta be their leader. Otherwise, Richie is gonna start bitching again, and nobody wants that.
We need you to stand up for us like before, or none of us is going to get out of here!
Stay close together.
After some wandering, they get to the center again. And then a familiar-looking boat makes an appearance. And I think we know where this is going.
All your fault, Bill. You set me out and it killed me.
No, it wasn't your fault, Bill.
George is dead. And it's not my fault.
That's all it took. It's slipping.
Show yourself. killed my little brother. And now you're gonna pay.
And once again, Bill calls it out, but this time it responds,
You still think you can see me?
Claiming that it can't show him its true form because their primitive minds would not be able to process it. Bill realizes that since it has to feed every 30 years, it must have to take on some kind of physical form, and that physical form must be close by. Bill releases the boat back in the path it was going on before the drain stopped it, and it continues going on that route despite that it's going away from the drain, which must mean something. So they follow it until they come to a door leading to the creature's lair. And holy crap, that is grim. Up until now, it has been a thing that generally feels vague and incorporeal. Now we're about to see its true form, or as close as we can get, and you can tell it's not going to be pretty. Of course, they're all a little worried that they won't make it, so Eddie makes a confession.
When I said that I was seeing someone, well, I'm not. In fact, I've never even been with any.
Is that why he doesn't know how to hug? That's so sad.
Well, I can't help you with that, pal, but thanks for sharing.
Beep, beep, Richie.
I could never sleep with somebody that I didn't love, and I've never really loved anyone, except you guys.
And here I thought Ben was the lonely one. Damn. Anyway, once they enter, they find that the ceiling is lined with human bodies cocooned in what looks like a spider web. And one of them is Audra. Now it's time for the big reveal. Okay, as rough as the internet is on this movie, if you haven't figured it out by now, I personally love it. Though even I can admit that it has its flaws, but they're mostly minor things like the occasional bad line delivery or a badly written line, stuff like that. But the design of its true form is probably the one major aspect of this movie that I have a problem with. And I don't even think the special effects with it are bad. I mean, there are some bad green screening effects, but that was common for that time. Green screening is really hard to get perfect. I think the animatronic is well made. And I might be coming at this from a slightly different angle than most people because, as you may already know if you've been watching my videos for a while, fuck! Spiders scare the crap out of me. Ah! God damn it, spiders! So I personally think that if it just looked like a giant black widow like it did in the book, that would have made it a lot scarier. Also, story-wise, it makes more sense for it to look like something familiar to us. As it mentioned earlier, humans can't see its true form. They can only see something that's similar to that. So if your brain is basically coming up with the image, it just makes more sense for it to go, oh, this creature is basically like a highly dangerous spider, therefore it conjures up a black widow, than for your brain to just invent a random giant meat spider with arms. Does that make sense? I do get them wanting to be creative, and it's a cool design on its own. I just feel like this is a rare occasion where creativity could have been reined in a little. In any case, remember that the little girl in the beginning was singing Itsy Bitsy Spider. That was a nice bit of foreshadowing. So I'm sure this happened a lot earlier for some people, but for me, this is the point where the movie just kind of takes a nosedive. It's not terrible or anything. I'd still watch the last 10 minutes of this movie over any of Silver Bullet or Sleepwalkers or Dreamcatcher, but it just gets kind of weird in a way where I get where they're going with most of this stuff, I just think it could have been handled better. Beth misses her first shot, meanwhile Bill is trying to fight it with his mind. Which is cool in theory, but it looks really silly here.
He thrusts his fists against the posts.
Anyway, Bev attempts her second shot and... well, damn, that's not good. Now it's flashing its deadlights, and Bill isn't looking away. And now it's got Ben. And Richie. Again, that's fine in concept, but it seems like it just happens really easily here. Like, shouldn't they know better by now than to let this happen? Basically, the scene just feels kind of rushed. That just leaves Eddie and Bev to fight it until Bev runs off. She actually has a plan, but apparently doesn't have time to tell Eddie about it.
What am I gonna do?
So Eddie remembers what worked when he was a kid and tries it again.
I believe in Santa Claus. I believe in the Easter Bunny.
I like how the line he said when he was a kid was less goofy.
This is battery acid, you slime!
Honestly, I don't know what the writers were thinking when they had Eddie's pre-ass-kicking one-liner start with, I believe in Santa Claus.
But I don't believe in you. This is battery acid. Now you disappear.
In any case, it doesn't work this time. Apparently he didn't believe enough. Maybe it was because he was fighting it alone and didn't have enough confidence that he could actually beat it. In the book, he lost an arm just like Georgie had. Meanwhile, Bev was looking for the silver earrings and found one. This time she aims straight for the deadlights and hits the mark. But unfortunately, it's not in time to save Eddie.
You're gonna be fine, Spaghetti Man.
Richie, please. For the last time, don't call me that.
And their club loses another member.
You know how
And it's legitimately heartbreaking. Meanwhile, it has slinked off down a tunnel, still not dead. And now the rest of them are just pissed.
This isn't over. If that thing comes back when I'm 70.
Let's finish it once and for all.
They find it too weak to move, and they just beat the crap out of it. It's pretty amazing. In the end, they physically rip out its heart and hold it up triumphantly. Damn, that's just primal. You don't fuck with a loser's club, man. When the deadlights go out, it's finally dead.
Audra.
Its lair begins to collapse and all the bodies come down from the ceiling. Oof, that is a grisly sight. Sure got all that webbing off in a hurry. The rest make it out alright, but it's definitely more of a bittersweet victory than the first time, since the Lucky Seven has lost another member.
I guess that's how I'd like to remember us, if I could remember us.
Mike has been keeping a journal, which is the only way he can remember now that it's all over and everyone is forgetting again.
Now that there is no further need for a lighthouse keeper, well, I feel I may move on. See whatever's down the road apiece.
Richie has gotten a part in a movie playing opposite another comedian who is a lot like Eddie. I guess this scene kind of foreshadowed that. Ben and Beverly left together and got married, and now she's expecting.
Another curse broken.
Way to go, you guys. Bill and his wife have not left yet, and she still hasn't snapped out of her catatonic state.
His sadness is profound. I wish there was something I could do. Something I could have done.
Well, there actually is something you did, Mike. On the way out, Bill spots his bike, Silver.
This bike saved little Stan's life once. Mine too. We were going so fast, I think we beat the devil.
Yeah, the rest of us are right there with you, Cabby. So it works, and Audra wakes up. This is one of those scenes where I never know quite how to react to it, because on one hand, I love Bill to death, and I am happy that he didn't lose his wife, but on the other, I can't deny how silly this looks. Aw, damn it. Some of Stephen King's ideas work fine in text form, but don't translate well visually. This is one of those cases. And yet I'm still glad that Bill got a happy ending, so whatever. The end. Or is it? Nah, it is. So that was it. I love this movie. It's up there with Pet Sematary, Misery, and Carrie as some of my favorite Stephen King movies. I don't really get why people are so hard on it. I know it's flawed, and I'll get to that in a minute. I just don't think it's flawed enough to deserve the amount of hate it gets these days. In fact, I think I remember people generally liking it when it first came out. Then again, that was pre-internet, for me anyway, so maybe I'm wrong. I mean, is it the scariest movie? No. Unless you find clowns scary, which I don't. But to be fair, I feel like this movie is going more for general creepiness, weirdness, and being unsettling than outright scary. And personally, if forced to choose, I prefer a horror movie that fails to scare me but keeps me interested anyway because I love the characters, than a horror movie that has a scary atmosphere but I can't fucking stand the characters. At the end of the day, I care more about being engaged than being scared, but that's just me. Some horror fans probably feel the opposite. But I think all the actors did a great job. Hell, I think the kids did better than the adults, though I don't think the adults were bad either. And they all had great chemistry. And honestly, some of my favorite scenes are where they're just hanging out and goofing around. I totally believe that all of them are BFFs. And I love that this is a Stephen King story where they basically destroy evil with the power of friendship. There are some interesting themes here, like how friendship can get you through difficult times and how you can't run away from your past. Not to mention fear in general and how crippling it can be. It is basically fear personified, as it were, and that makes for an interesting villain. Of course, this all comes from the book. I'm not saying that the movie deserves all the credit for it, but it definitely deserves credit for translating it well for the most part. Speaking of the book, I haven't read it since before the miniseries aired, so my memory of it is pretty spotty. And I'm sure there are plenty more differences between it and the miniseries that I forgot about. I mostly remember the ones that just really jumped out at me when I first saw the movie. Probably the biggest difference is how they fought it as kids. In the miniseries, they got it with one of the silver earrings and it retreated. In the book, well, it played up the cosmic aspect a lot more. See, if you didn't know, Stephen King books all have a shared universe. And this is kind of simplifying it because I don't want to spend too much time on this. The universe is held up by a giant turtle like in Hindu and Chinese mythology. It's expanded a lot more in the Dark Tower books, but in this book, the turtle helped the kids defeat it by having Bill enter its mind and having a battle of wills with it. So what we see Bill doing as an adult here is kind of a severely scaled down version of that. Also, when they fought it in the form of a spider as adults, they followed it down to its lair to find that it had a nest of eggs, which they also destroyed. So yeah, both fights with it were scaled down a lot, especially the first. Obviously, it would have been cool to see all that, but, you know, budget constraints. Another pretty sizable difference is that they mostly left out a character. In the miniseries, he was sort of downgraded to one of Henry's gang, who I think doesn't even have any lines. However, in the book, Patrick Hockstetter was probably worse than Henry. Along with being part of Henry's gang and all that entails, he tortured small animals and apparently murdered his kid brother when he was little. It would have been interesting to see him in the miniseries, but I kind of see why they left him out. With Henry being the leader of the gang and already having a presence, they might have felt that adding another prominent gang member would clutter things. Oh, and one thing that happened in the book and not in the miniseries that I didn't want to mention, but I remember when Nostalgia Critic covered this and it was all people could talk about in the comments section because they expected him to mention it for some reason. So I'm just gonna let the stupid cat out of the bag so we can say that I talked about it and just move on. Again, I haven't read the book in ages, so I'm not the best person to talk about it, but there was a scene in the book where, after defeating it, the kids got lost in the sewer and something about how they had to bring solidarity to the group and maybe growing up was also a part of it, but, Beverly was like a doorknob and they each got a turn. Ugh! It's weird. Maybe Stephen King was still on drugs when he wrote that book, or I don't know. I'm kind of surprised that his editor didn't make him take that out. For what it's worth, I don't remember it being graphic. It was all about their emotions and such during the act. But yeah, 12-year-olds having sex is just squicky, especially when there are 7 of them and only 1 is a girl. So there, I talked about it. Let's move on. Another difference that I've kind of mentioned already is that it took many forms in the book, where in the movie it takes the form of Pennywise the majority of the time and only occasionally shows up in other forms. I guess I can see why they did that. Again, probably a budget thing, but also it does kind of make sense to pick a form to have it be in the majority of the time so we can, I guess, identify it more easily. Also, they got Tim Curry to play Pennywise, so again, I can see them wanting to get as much use out of him as possible. The only thing that bothers me is, because of that, people tend to refer to it as Pennywise as if the two names are interchangeable. I've seen articles with titles like 13 Facts You Probably Didn't Know About Pennywise, and it was about it in general and not just the Pennywise form. I know that's kind of pedantic. Pennywise sounds snappier than it, so I get people wanting to use it. But Pennywise was just one form of it, and frankly, I just think that the concept of it, an eldritch horror that can take any form so that it can feed off of your fear, to be much more scary of a concept than the clown form it occasionally takes. Even if that clown is brilliantly played by Tim Curry. Hence why I've tried to refer to it as it in these videos when it's not in the form of Pennywise. Speaking of which, I realized I haven't talked about Tim Curry much, and that's only because, what am I going to say about Tim Curry that you don't already know? Fun fact, in 1975, Tim Curry played a transvestite from outer space.
How about that?
In a movie called Rocky Horror Picture Show.
I see you shiver with anticipation.
Bet you didn't know that. I mean, that and Pennywise are probably what he's best known for, along with being the butler in Clue. I mean, I guess Darkness from Legend might be a little lesser known, but again, that's probably all stuff you all know about. I do think it's interesting that most of the parts he's best known for involve him being so heavily made up that you almost don't recognize him. Oh, actually, here's one you might not remember. Tim Curry was in an episode of Tales from the Crypt that involved a rural family of 3, and he played all of them. So, that's Tim Curry.
Bah! Where in tarnation are you?
That's Tim Curry.
He ain't gonna want her.
And that's Tim Curry.
I ain't washed in a couple of weeks.
That episode aired about 3 years after the It miniseries, so I'm guessing his portrayal of Pennywise was what inspired the idea. I do think it's kind of amusing that the mom is the one who is most recognizable as him. But back to It. Probably the main criticism I have against the miniseries is that it could be more scary. Lack of gore isn't that big of a deal, and it's kind of necessary for a made-for-TV movie, but there could have been more scares. I actually think that Part 1 did pretty well in that regard, especially during the first half or so. Basically, Georgie's death and the aftermath with the photo album are both pretty unsettling, and probably the most disturbing parts of the miniseries. Scare-wise, it pretty much goes downhill from there. The main reason might be that Pennywise starts out really creepy, while still being kind of funny, and that sliding scale just kind of gradually moves all the way to just funny after a point. Though even after that point he has his moments. It's basically the same deal as Freddy Krueger, except that Pennywise does in 2 movies what Freddy did in about 5. Other than that, I've already talked about how the final form in the end doesn't do much for me, and how the dialogue is a bit clunky at times, and there's a bit of hamminess and cheese. And again, it kind of falls apart during the last 10 minutes or so. But that's about it. I still think this movie is pretty solid overall, and I think everyone involved did a great job with it. Especially taking into account when it was made and the limitations they were under. This wasn't actually the first attempt at adapting a Stephen King book with a miniseries. The first was Salem's Lot in 1979, and I've tried watching it and I just can't really get into it. It, however, was the first one to be relatively high budget for this kind of project, and it was a huge undertaking. Yeah, it's not perfect, but I think it deserves more credit than it gets. So, about that remake. Actually, I ended up making that segment its own video so I could release it sooner, but if you missed it and want to know my opinions of a trailer for a movie that came out like 2 weeks ago, go watch it. So I guess I'm finally done talking about It. There are other Stephen King miniseries I like The Stand and The Shining, though I know I'm in the minority with that one. But It will always be my favorite. I may talk about those others sometime in the future, but definitely not anytime soon, since doing a 4-part film den while also trying to meet a deadline, despite missing it by about 2 weeks, turned out to be a hell of an undertaking. That's it for now. See you next time.
And a queen with a plain face on the throne of England. And there was a bloodthirsty clown who beckoned innocent children into the sewer and swallowed them whole.